Hello, my name is Jessica Polito. This research project that I completed for 589 PE and Science Capstone is titled Critical Needs of Young Athletes. So after working with middle school athletics these past few years, I've come to realize that there might be a connection with some of our common hiring practices for middle school coaches and the amount of injuries that were occurring among our students. These injuries were going beyond sprains and strains. I noticed that a lot of them were requiring surgery, so a lot of students were in casts, crutches, and not able to participate in athletics or even their physical education courses for quite some time, for weeks to months at a time, not including the time after that for physical therapy and full recovery. So therefore, that's how I came up with my purpose study. My purpose study was to examine the requirements, qualifications, and perceptions of middle school athletic coaches. The research questions developed to explore this topic. The first one is, what are the requirements and qualifications needed for middle school coaching positions? The second, what influence do coaches have on strength and conditioning activities for middle school student athletes? And thirdly, what are the perceptions of middle school coaches on causes of injury for student athletes? So for our third slide, the first literature review, this study had 770 participants out of approximately 8,000 coaches for the GHSA, so the Georgia High School Association. They used a 76-item questionnaire that was completed online through SurveyMonkey. And the results showed that the majority of coaches have a master's degree. Second highest was a bachelor's degree, followed by a doctorate degree, and less than 1% held an associate's degree. So even though this study is based on high school coaches, the study makes clear the importance of higher education among coaching positions due to the percentage of coaches with degrees beyond a bachelor's degree. These coaches sought out higher education in their field of physical education. You might ask, so big deal, why is this important for middle school athletics? Well, I believe you can't have a successful athletic program in high school if a large amount of the athletes are injured before they get there or experience preventable career-ending injury. We want to give them a fighting chance. Start nice and healthy. So moving on to the fourth slide, the second article. The purpose of that research article was to evaluate the effectiveness of a coach-led preventative training program, or PDP for short. So as for the procedure, the coaches were instructed in one 90-minute hands-on workshop. And after completion of that workshop, for 2 seasons, these coaches incorporated the PDP as part of their regular warm-up routine at both practices and games 3 times a week for 8 weeks. The participants were 122 youth soccer players, ranging in age from about 8 to 14 years old. The demographics of the coaches were not specified, but the results were amazing. For the fall season, 62% of those participants were identified as a high injury risk. And after that 8-week inclusion of the PDP, 55% of them improved. So almost all of them improved. And in the spring season, we saw the same pattern. 64% were identified as high injury risk, and it had a 59% improvement. So it's evident that even just one 90-minute session for coaches can minimize the risk of injury among their players significantly. These coaches were volunteer coaches. They're not in the field of education. They don't have degrees in the field physical education. Just volunteer coaches. So you don't need a degree to access these kinds of sessions. It's a great supplementary tool for new and veteran coaches. And moving on to the fifth slide, the final article. The purpose was to describe the pervasiveness and patterns of sport injuries and identify the risk factors. So as for the procedure, very similar to the first, they used an online survey. And on the online survey, the participants needed to report prior injuries and report the date it occurred, type of injury, possible cause, and time recovery. The participants were 82 university-level athletes that ranged in age from 21 to 29 years old. So once the data was collected and analyzed, the results showed that the average of injuries per athlete was a little bit more than 2. The mean was 2.3. And the leading injuries were, number 1 was the ankle injuries, followed by knee, third was shoulder injuries, and ended with head and back injuries. So those that participated in team sports experienced more acute injuries versus those that were individual sport athletes. However, the individual sport athletes experience a lot more overuse injuries than those that play the team sports. So this information can be helpful for any coach to incorporate a plan to help minimize these types of occurrences. And moving on to slide 6. For the methodology of my project, upon receiving approval from our professor, the questionnaire was created and collected using Google Survey. 6 middle schools participated from 3 different school districts in Southern California, here in San Diego. Not all middle schools have competitive athletic programs, so it took some time to compile a list. And after numerous emails and phone calls to these schools, 30 coaches took the survey. The survey itself included quantitative, qualitative, yes and no, and open-ended questions. The series of questions covered the demographics, some of the basics, the gender, age, their schooling, and employment. It was then followed by questions in regards to certifications, trainings, seminars attended within the last 5 years. And it ended with the open-ended questions asking for their thoughts and experience with student athletic injuries. So the next 2 slides will present the results. So slide 7. The male participants by far dominated over the female participants. The male participants were 63%, and the minority females were only 36%. And they were quite a young group. A little bit more than half, 53%, were under the age of 25 years old. So we're talking high school graduates, some college to college graduates that are coaching middle school athletics here in Southern California for this particular study. But it had a decent representation of the sports. So these coaches represented baseball, softball, basketball, football, soccer, field hockey, volleyball, and tennis. So 8 sports were well represented. And out of the 30 participants, complete disparity in comparison to the Georgia High School Association, only 33% are credentialed teachers. And the most common certifications held amongst these participants were CPR, basic life support, and first aid. So at minimum, the majority of them only had CPR and first aid certification. 3% were only represented athletic trainer. EMT was also only 3%. And 2 participants omitted answering this part of the question. Okay, and moving on for the warm-up activities. Large majority of these coaches include a cardio segment and stretches and or sport-specific drill. So if you have a 1-hour practice session, cardio is definitely included with some stretches, and then maybe sport specific with whatever time was left. And then for the last couple questions on the survey in regards to perceptions of middle school coaches on causes for injury for student athletes, the first major theme discovered was lack of strength. So some of these responses that these coaches were writing mentioned students at this age group can't even do a correct push-up with correct form, 1 push-up with correct form. Sometimes we'll see really strong athletes at that age group, and sometimes we'll see the opposite, so it kind of sounded like it was a hit and miss. And then one response was, or a common theme was, the lack of strength was one of the reasons why it led to some injuries during practice or during a game. The second theme discovered was new to the sport, so lack of experience. It would explain why they spend so much time on sport-specific drills or some of the basics, just learning the rules of the game versus, trying to get them strong and conditioned for the activities that they're about to partake in. But, there's got to be a happy balance between, the sport itself, drills, and strength and conditioning, just to give them a fighting chance, so that they're a well-rounded athlete. And the third theme discovered was attention and concentration. Some of the responses included, they just goof around. Middle school kids, they just goof around. You know, yes and no. There's the maturity level can be questionable amongst those kids, but still doesn't take away the fact that we still have to do our best to prepare our students as best we can, as much as we can, all the time. One coach responded with that they try not to keep their practice sessions more than an hour and a half maximum, because they felt like they weren't going to be able to keep their attention span longer than that. Okay, so even as new coaches, they recognize that there's a lack of strength among the students, but they're not addressing it in their physical practices. So moving on to slide 9 for discussion. The current research that was discussed earlier in the presentation supports the importance of training and education for all coaches. The average attendance for trainings and seminars or any other schooling on the subject had been extremely low in the last 5 years. So it's unclear why that may be. So when we discuss the comparison with the Georgia high school coaches and the middle school coaches in Southern California, there is an incredible difference in education and certification. Now we're comparing high school versus middle school. Should they both be held accountable on the same guidelines and expectations? How many trainings and seminars or conferences or professional development sessions should coaches attend a year? Where is the budget going to come from? Chances are it's probably always going to come down to a budget issue. And as far as hiring coaches, who's going to be held accountable? Is it going to come down to the principal? Is it going to come down to the athletic director or the student, the ASB advisor, whoever's in charge of the after-school program and the athletics? Somebody's going to be held accountable. And for recommendations, implications, and future research, I believe that the research needs to continue for this age group. It was difficult to find current literature that can help shape athletic programs in that age group. So after completing the survey, modifications will be made to address questions that came up. As young as the coaches are, they recognize and acknowledge that injuries occur due to lack of strength. However, they're not incorporating strength and conditioning activities in their practices, so it's unclear as to why that is. Is it a lack of access to equipment? Do they have adequate facilities? Is it a budget issue? So if it's a budget issue, perhaps a low-cost supplemental session can be a step in the right direction. Networking with other schools and collaborating with them can be cost-effective as well. So that brings us to the conclusion of my presentation. The slide 11 includes the references. Thank you for your time, and God bless.